So welcome to the AFT Construction Podcast today, and I'm fortunate to host Taylor Davis with Taylor Plosser Davis, Architecture and Design. So welcome, Taylor.
Thanks, Brad. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And, I was going through your resume, very impressive, your background and your work experience. And, before we dive into some of the experience you've had over the years, and one thing I want to speak about is when you started your firm, you started in the recession, which I'm sure was an adventure. So we'll definitely dive into that. But, Taylor, when you're looking at architecture, what are some design features to consider, for clients that are looking at their forever home, from design and architecture? What are some musts that they should be thinking about?
As architects, we really have the great fortune of meeting with folks as they're trying to make some big decisions and kind of helping them make those decisions. And the question of remodeling versus building new is one of those big questions. So we talk a lot about what they're really looking for. Generally, it's during a time of transition when they're talking about doing this, either new kids getting a little older, kids leaving, them looking to downsize, so all of those kinds of transitions kind of factor into this. So when we talk to clients about what to consider when they're doing these remodels or forever homes, we want them to think about what's happening right now, the thing that's, forcing this decision, but also to think kind of 20 years from now. And what does that look like for them? So that they're not making the decision based on what things look like just today. And as a mom of 3 kids, I have been through infancy. We are in the midst of teenagerdom. I just had one go to college last year. So I'm sort of in that trajectory with them, and sometimes a little bit ahead of the game. Generally, what we tend to focus on more so than what it looks like per se is how it's going to function. So we talk about how easy is it going to be for them to use, whether that's today, how do they like to cook? How do they like to entertain? How do they see themselves doing that in 20 years? That's always the next question. Maintenance, do you like to spend your weekends fishing or working in the yard? If you like to spend them fishing, you may want to think about some different building materials and some ways about building that allow for that kind of lifestyle. If you're chasing your kids every weekend and you're going to soccer games, you may not have time to be focused on cleaning out the gutters or paint and trim. So we talk about maintenance, and we talk about how those things also correlate to kind of efficiency. What do they need that's predictable in there? Do they need their energy costs to be predictable? Is that something that if they are looking at wanting to spend more money on college or spend more money on travel if they've retired, if we can sort of create some sense of what their energy efficiency needs are going to be, that's also a sort of big part of that conversation. But all of that taps into really kind of, what do you want your life to look like when this is done? What do you want it to look like today, and what do you want it to look like if you're going to be here for forever, 20 years from now? And if it's about, I want to be able to entertain with my spouse on the screen porch, or I want to be able to travel on the weekends and not worry about the house while I'm gone, or what it is. We talk about what sort of lifestyle, and that really informs what we do just as much as the site or the materials they want to use, or whether they love a white kitchen or don't love a white kitchen. It's really about some of those bigger picture things.
No, I love that you do that. And I guess, before diving into some of those great questions, because I love that you touched on the maintenance and the lifestyle, and I want to dive into that. But I guess going to your point, the one thing I see, when we're meeting with clients, they're asking about budget, right? Which any of our clients, they have a budget no matter what level they're building at. And there's so much that goes into, should I remodel my house? Should I stay at the same house and tear it to concrete and go vertical again? Should I buy a new lot and purchase a new custom home? And a lot of times clients, I don't want to say get hung up, but they're very conscious about, am I overbuilding for my neighborhood? Am I overbuilding for, the market? And so how do you navigate, I guess, the wish list of the client where they see these pictures and they want this amazing dream house and dream kitchen, or maybe low maintenance house that you're going to help guide them because of lifestyle? So how do you handle that conversation with the client as far as budget, expectation, market, especially if they're looking at just the finance portion of it?
We, at the very beginning of a project, before we even put a proposal together, we ask about and we tend not to call it a budget. We actually call it an investment target. What do you want to invest in this home? Because I think for a lot of people, that helps them frame that conversation a little bit differently. If you are looking to make an investment that you want to flip in 5 years because you're going to be leaving, that's a different conversation. If you're making an investment in a forever home that's a 20-year plus investment, that's a different conversation. So I think starting out just that very term, not necessarily budget, but investment, because you are going to get something out. It's not just a budget. It's not just what you're going to spend. It's what you're going to get out of it over that time frame. So we start at the very beginning. We ask that question at the outset. And when we sort of frame our process so that I like to say we get pricing early and often. So we try to engage contractors very early in the process. I can't keep a day-to-day dealing with what prices are every day. And clearly, they've been varying all over the place. Delays and I know framing costs have been all over the place recently. So we encourage our clients to engage a contractor very early in that process so that we can get cost information and relate it back to scope very early in the process before we've done a full set of drawings. We've got diagrams and a set of preliminary specifications so that we kind of know what we're talking about with some different options and get some order of magnitude costs around it. And then we can have another conversation with real numbers, with real investment targets, with real scope associated with it. And we can have a real heart-to-heart and say, all right, this is kind of where everything lays out. We can talk wish lists all day long, but until you have some numbers and some drawings to kind of look at, I think it's really hard for people to make decisions. And so what we want to do in those early stages is provide as much information as possible. And a lot of times we even ask a realtor to come on, an experienced realtor, and give advice about comps in the neighborhood that they've seen over the last 5 years, what their projections are. They're very educated in terms of being able to provide that kind of information too. So those early stages of a design process with us really are a lot about information gathering. And armed with information, you can make much better decisions.
Yeah, I love that you do that. I mean, that speaks to the value you're bringing, because I think it's very few and far between, contractors or architects, designers that are bringing in brokers and realtors. And I've seen on projects where you have a client that's looking at just the investment aspect of it, as you're mentioning. Hey, we may sell this in 5 years, or, this is to get our kids through high school, then we plan on downsizing. So we want to look at this realistically as an investment. So the broker can really help say, look, especially with finishes, this is what I've seen trending. This is what clients are liking and asking for, and so they could point you in the right direction. I love that you have a good pulse on pricing, because I think the toughest thing for an architect is to have that ongoing database. You're trying to match the client's budget, but at the same time, things are changing every day on labor availability, material. And so is there a close group of contractors you work with? Have you built that over the years? I mean, how have you built your database, I guess, of good, teammates, if you will?
I have some great contractors. I've been really fortunate to work with amazing contractors. And having grown up here and then moved back here, I have really been lucky in that sense that I have really good trusted relationships with them. I tend to go through an RFQ process, or I encourage my clients to go through an RFQ process. They don't always want to do it. A lot of folks want to bid a project and they want to bid it out to 20 people, and that's fine. I understand that. Price pressure, I think, for a lot of folks tends to drive their process. But I encourage an RFQ process, and that allows us to have conversations with contractors at the very beginning to understand whether or not they're a fit. And within that sort of group of probably 5 to 8 contractors that I've worked with regularly, they can get engaged early on and help provide that information. And so I do have a really good kind of trusted team and sort of a community of folks that I talk to on a regular basis. But I also think that that engaging and having those conversations early on in that RFQ process, price to a certain extent, it's going to cost what it costs.
Yep, it is.
It's going to cost what it costs. And beyond that, there's a lot of different ways that builders build. And some have, full-time supervision. Some don't want full-time supervision. Some folks need somebody who can take care of the dog on the weekends when they're out of town. Some folks don't want to have anything to do with that. So it's kind of understanding personality fits and kind of being able to help clients go through a process where they can find a contractor and engage one that's a good fit for them, understanding that cost is probably going to be fairly similar for whatever 5 to 8 contractors they've been talking to.
Yeah, I love that you share that, because I feel like when a client, not to throw clients under the bus, because there's this understanding, hey, let's get the plans done, let's get the design, let's send out to 3 or 4 bids, let's get our most competitive one, we move forward. Well, the problem with that, at least my experience has been over the last 15 years building, outside of college, is that, it really puts the architect in a tough position and the designer, because what ends up happening is, every builder, as you mentioned, they have their own process, they have their own interpretation of your design, of your drawings. And so the bids typically are never apples for apples, but a lot of times, if you're taking the lowest number, there's a reason why, or there's things missed, or things maybe that expectations are different. And so the client ends up paying for that in the end, right? Whereas if you could bring the builder on from the beginning, well, now you have a good pulse, right? So as you're designing, Taylor, and you're going through these designs, well, you have a contractor to your side, that there's a camaraderie, there's understanding, and you can bounce ideas off each other. Will this work? Does this meet the budget? And then it also factors into the other conversations you're having in regard to maintenance and lifestyle and all these things, right? So there's that handoff that really goes well, that really creates a good positive experience for the client.
Mm-hmm. And it also helps the client perceive everybody working together as a team. And I think that's a really important piece of that, is that when they see me or understand that I have a good relationship with the builder, and I'm going to call them and say, I'm curious, have you ever built this way before, or used this type of insulation, or I just took a continuing education class on this kind of flashing or roofing or whatever it is. Have you used it before? What's your experience been? And they can say, junk, don't touch it. Or yes, I've had a great experience with it. That they understand that helps inform the whole process. I don't want to be throwing new materials or processes on a builder. Necessarily. That's generally not a great way to work sometimes. But I think that team and that camaraderie and that information sharing gives them a sense of security and confidence.
I love that. And it's funny because, you think a lot about the position you're in. If you're able to understand the client's budget or expectation, right? When you talk about, I love the term you use, investment, not budget. So if you think about investment, some clients that you and I have experienced, they're at 2 stages. One of them may be, hey, this is an investment. We're going to sell the home in 5 years, maybe 10 years, but this is our end goal. And you have other clients that say, look, I've done the flipping houses. Like, I've moved. I want what I want. I understand I'm paying a premium, but this is my forever home. Like, I'm going to be here and it's okay. So understanding that's going to set you up for success, through design, because you understand the value of their investment and what they're doing. And also the discussions you're having, because if you think about purchasing a new car or going to meal prep for a dinner, right? If you're going to the grocery store and you have a budget and you understand the expectations, how many people are going to attend, what type of food, you're going to be more targeted in putting that menu together, right? Just like a car, you don't expect a car salesman to fit this imaginary wish list unless you give them a real number. Hey, I want to spend $50,000 on a car. Okay, that's going to narrow it down in this realm. We have options A, B, and C, and here's the upgrades. And it's really hard for customers to understand in regard to home construction. There's so many variables. And if you play this cat and mouse game where they don't share their numbers or the investment that they're willing to do, it makes it really hard for you and I.
It's very difficult. And we are much better able to serve them when they are open and forthright about some of that conversation that they're having internally. Because you're right, it's a guessing game. And I guess wrong a lot. Yes.
Oh, it's so funny. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer new builds? Do you prefer remodeling? I know there's challenges and complexities to both.
I my first job after architecture school was in New York, and I worked for a firm by Blender Bell that did mostly preservation work. And we worked on Grand Central. I mean, I was doing bathrooms, and Rockefeller Center, and so all of that stuff was kind of in the office when I was there, kind of cutting my teeth. And so, remodeling in that sense was really exciting. Like we were really sort of uncovering new ways of looking at old buildings and having people engage with them in a way that they hadn't in a long time. And when I moved back to Birmingham, that I sort of kept that mentality. I enjoy remodeling. Sometimes you find the most interesting things when you're doing remodeling in a home, and you learn about the story of a house. And there's a lot of historic, older home stock around here, and so a lot of folks, there's a lot of sentimental value attached to those existing houses. So I do a lot of remodeling and renovation because that's what's here, and because people love the houses that they're in. So I don't know if I prefer it, but I do enjoy it a lot. I think there's something sort of detective like about being able to find what was there, and also to solve problems with kind of a lot of constraints associated with an existing space. New construction can be a challenge too, but in a different way. I mean, I think it's sort of identifying from scratch where people want to go. All of a sudden, their world is open to them, and do they want 4 bedrooms? Do they want 5 bedrooms? Do they need this kind of kitchen or this kind of kitchen? Sometimes the choices that are available to them that hadn't been previously available to them take some time to kind of wade through those. So from a design perspective, there's some fun challenges that go along with that, with really sort of helping the homeowner kind of hone in on what they really want out of a home. And when they come to the table, sort of understanding that in a new build, it can be a really exciting process, because you can tailor very much what that house looks like for them, specific to their needs. And that's a fun job. So I don't really have a preference. I tend to do more of the renovations just because that's kind of what's been available to me. But I love new construction as well.
Well, I will say that doing renovations, remodels, especially if you're doing historic, or, those projects, they can be very challenging. There's a lot of, I don't want to say restrictions, but there's requirements and there's regulation. And then there's also the complexity of just working on older home and the limitations there you have to work around. So being that you had a lot of experience in commercial, working for, Bayer in New York, and that, big firm there, and working on these amazing projects in Manhattan, what made you, I guess, push, to this point in your career, we're doing more residential. What did you like? Commercial residential was, something more drawn to you?
It's kind of a story, actually. So I had been working in New York, and we lived there, and I was pregnant with our first child, and sort of, it was kind of.
And were you living in Manhattan at the time?
Living in Manhattan.
Wow.
And so our oldest was born in February of 2001. And so we were trying to decide whether or not we were going to stay in the city or move to the suburbs. And then September 11th happened. And I had actually been working as a consultant to the Port Authority prior to the point of having our first child. And I had been doing design work for the mall underneath the trade center for years. So I had spent 3 days a week at the trade center. And honestly, when we moved to Ridgewood, Ridgewood, New Jersey, about 5 days after the towers went down. And
was that intentional? Had you already planned to move, or
we had already planned it? It was sort of coincidental. And so all of those things kind of happening all at once. I had a 6-month-old, a job that I had loved, had been sort of connected with this tragedy, and we knew people who had died in the towers. It was very personal. And then sort of the idea of being across the river and not, when that happened, we couldn't leave the city for a little while. We were sort of stuck. We had all these evacuation plans. So the idea of continuing to work in Manhattan and being at home and having a baby at home was kind of more than I could take. So there were lots of sort of factors. And at that point I was like, okay, we're going to make a decision. And that decision was that I was going to start working from home. And so when I did that, I started doing some little commercial work, but really started diving into residential work. It was available to me. It fit my schedule. I was a young mom. I was able to coordinate with people that I had worked with prior who were doing consulting work on residential jobs. And so I just kind of fell into it based on the circumstances that were happening at the time. And ultimately, I was able to communicate to my clients because I was like them. They were worried about where they were going to have their whole family over to watch TV on Sunday afternoons to watch the football game and where the kids were going to be playing. I was worried about that too. And so I think that there was kind of of an alignment between my clients and my own life and sort of the kind of work that I wanted to do and the kind of space I needed to be in as a young mom and as an architect at the same time.
I love that story. It's funny because you know, with life, a lot of us, you know, we work in different fields and you kind of get these experiences and then you find, you know, not that you weren't passionate about commercial architecture, work on these amazing projects in Manhattan, you know, but you find something that really hits home that you realize, hey, I'm good at this and I can relate and here we go. And then once you have that passion behind you, know, sky's the limit, right?
Yeah,
you know, and then,
it's been great.
Which is super exciting. So, you know, fast forward to 9 years ago, now here you are back in Alabama, back where you're from, and starting your firm in a recession. You know, how was that? You know, where did that decision come from? Because I know you're kind of freelancing, I believe, at the time, but now it's like official. We're going to start our firm. It's not the greatest of economies for construction, you know, on a national level. So what caused that jump?
I really had a good friend and kind of the closest thing to family, but not family, that I had grown up with. And they had purchased a home in a nearby suburb. And I happened to be at the Y on I think I was on an elliptical trainer. And she hopped up next to me and said, "You need to come look at this house." And I said, "I don't know if I can do that." And she said, "Yes, you can." And so we started a project together, and it was a big project. And I had a 9-month-old at the time who was our third, and sort of that was kind of what kicked it off. It was really somebody asking me, and in retrospect, I'm really lucky. I've done a lot of work for that family in various iterations, brothers, sisters. But that's kind of what started it. And there was a lot of ebb and flow during those years. There were a couple of years where there was a lot of work. And then there were a couple of years where there was nothing. And luckily at the time, it sort of worked with our family. And I could kind of pull back and be mom for a little while. And then 3 months later, when a project really got going, I could step into the fray a little bit. So it allowed a little bit of that kind of ebb and flow. But it was definitely rough going for a little while. I'm lucky because I moved back home. And I know I grew up here. My parents grew up here. My grandparents grew up here. My sister lives here. I had the good fortune of knowing a lot of folks, and that helped generate work, surely. So, and my dad is an architect, so I grew up in a firm. He does commercial work. So that helped sort of name recognition wise, I think, too. People saw that and knew that I was an architect, and there was a level of trust that I probably hadn't demonstrated yet, but they figured that Dad could do it, I could too.
Well, in fairness, you did have some good credibility, though, working, you know, for Buyer Blinder Bell, right, New York City. I mean, that's a good resume there. You know, so I guess from the family side of things, I mean, being a mother of three, I mean, is there, you know, did you take your 3 children job sites? You know, is there an aspiration for them to be involved and follow the architecture?
I don't think any of them want to be an architect.
Let's see how hard mom works.
There may be. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of that, but I have definitely taken them to job sites. My youngest was really, he was kind of my wingman for a lot of work, and would show up on job sites. And occasionally a super would call me or text me with a little picture of a little toy that Edward had left in like some raw concrete or something. There would be like a Star Wars figure with a hand sticking out or something. And I have pictures of them on all sorts of job sites walking around, or I would send them over to go measure something with tape. So they are very familiar with what I do, and it's been fun to have them around. I grew up with that. On Sunday afternoons, we would go to Dad's job site. We would drive around and go visit whatever was under construction. It's kind of the way I grew up, and I don't subject all of them to it all the time, but I definitely did do it. And from time to time, they still come and take a look. It's been funny. Some of the projects have been for families that they're friends with, and so they'll go to somebody's house for an event or something like that, and they'll sort of have a knowing smile and say, "Yeah, I was here when the walls were being framed." You may not know it.
Yeah, I think that's a fun part for kids though, and even us. I mean, even a lot of people ask, I guess the joys we have in construction, and the one, the part of that is, it's a tough industry. There's a lot of challenges with construction and design and architecture, and the labor behind it and the critical thinking and trying to make all the stuff work with building codes and budgets and everything that we deal with. But the fun thing is at the end of the day to see a project finish and see the happiness of the client, or drive by in the years to come and see that masterpiece, or that you were part of that, right? There's a satisfaction there, right? That, you're actually building something that people can use. So thinking of that with your designs, being an architect, especially heavy in residential, one thing we should all think about is aging in place, right? Like, and you spoke about this early in the conversation, as you're going through that interview with the client, you're trying to understand their needs, and, you have to start thinking about, are you going to have maybe in-laws living with you or parents living with you? Are you yourself going to need ADA features, So how does that come into play where you're thinking about overall design and aesthetic, but also the convenience and aging part of that aspect?
Well, it's a hard topic to bring up. I mean, aging in place is probably the least sexy thing you can say. Like, there's nothing sort of design greatness about that. You start to bring. My dermatologist actually said you need to stop talking about aging. And so it can be it's actually an easier conversation to have with someone in their 40s than it is with somebody in their 70s. And there is a lot of hesitation to sort of bring it up. Nobody wants to be faced with kind of the reality that at some point we all may need some accommodation, and that can vary from anything from having your knee replaced, or a torn ACL for a teenager, or having some sort of accommodation makes living in a home easier. So we try to frame it a little bit as, these are features that you may not need today, but we're going to build it so that if you need them, they're available to you. So when we're building new, we just build 36-inch doorways. We just do that.
Yeah, you make them wide.
That question. We just do it. We put in blocking in the walls so that we can put in grab bars. We talk about how great looking curbless showers are. And then we have other conversations that, because I think aging in place can feel limiting. I think it's a question of actually really how you intend to live. So we're working on a kitchen that's under construction right now, for a couple who who takes care of their grandkids on a regular basis. They've got little ones with them a lot. And so the whole kitchen was sort of designed with the capacity to be able to cook with their grandkids. And so a lot of the features that we quote unquote see for ADA or aging in place are actually really good for just about everybody. So when you think about a countertop that's a little bit lower, so the kids can pull up a chair rather than a stool which tips over, and sit and roll out cookie dough with grandma, that's a pretty good feature. It also works for a wheelchair if one needs it. Or an induction cooktop, so you're not reaching over a gas flame and the kids aren't going to touch something. So there's a lot of overlap between some of those features that we think about for aging in place and just living. When I was in New York, the laundry room was in our building, and I had the baby Bjorn, and I had the laundry. And I remember trying to sort of negotiate turning the door handle with all of that stuff in my hands all the time. And the idea that you can just put lever handles everywhere, and I could have hit it with my elbow and walked right in, that doesn't have anything to do with my being older. That had to do with that I had a baby and a bunch of laundry in my hands. So a lot of these kind of aging in place features are really about ease of use and facilitating, easier ways to live, as opposed to facilitating somebody who needs something because they've had an injury or a disability or is concerned about falls or stuff like that. A lot of it is just common sense.
Well, I love the strategy behind that because, most people, as you mentioned, when you think of aging or ADA, like it's, from a design aesthetic, like, ADA, as most of us are accustomed, it's not attractive, right? It's not convenient, there's not like the most visually appealing aesthetic. But when you start thinking practicality, when you start saying levers on your door so you can open it, easily, or a kid can open it, or curbless showers, which, hey, in a high-end custom home, everyone wants a curbless shower, right? It looks good. Yeah. You have that frameless glass to the floor is perfect. You think about the wide doors, the wide hallways, and not only is it great for wheelchair access or convenience, walking by people in the hallway, but when you think about, moving in your furniture, how much of a pain is it moving into a house where you can't turn your sofa around the corner, right? So wide hallway, now you're thinking about the end result in furnishings. And so you're creating this lifestyle that is not only aesthetically pleasing, but it's also convenient, for that customer.
Right. Practical. And it's that's a whole lot easier to talk about than it is to say, in 20 years, the likelihood of your needing some sort of accommodation that you will need a walker. Nobody wants to talk about that, but I don't. But they do want to hear how having certain features in their home can make it more usable or more user friendly. How they can have somebody over. And for a lot of folks in their 40s, I think, we are now, in some cases, looking at having our folks come and stay with us, either for a short period of time or an extended period of time. So how do we build spaces that accommodate that? And in the short term, that may mean that your parents come and stay for a few months or are there to help take care of kids during an illness, or you're taking care of them during an illness. But as we age, sometimes that's caregiver space. So those kinds of features can transition based on where you are kind of life cycle, but they aren't specifically relegated to ADA or aging in place.
Yeah, I love that. And have you seen your clientele in Alabama, have they started to gravitate towards maybe they're sensitive, so low VOC, volatile organic compound, you think about like paints that kind of have that fume, healthy living, low maintenance, as you mentioned, low maintenance finishes that they're not going to have to maintain, whether, they're engineered quartz or they're looking at rain gutters or the carbon footprint, sustainability, net zero. I mean, all these little things that a lot of people are thinking about. Are you seeing a growing, I guess, need to market your firm towards that angle, or is that even being requested yet by your clientele?
In some cases, it's being requested, and sometimes we talk about the benefits without sort of mentioning sustainability. People have all sorts of understandings of what sustainability is. So it's not even about point of view. It's very hard to define in a lot of ways. So we can talk about green architecture or sustainability, and people sort of glaze over. They're not really quite sure what it is. But if I say we want to use this fiber cement siding, that there's a new product that you won't have to paint it for 20 years, and now we can miter the corners so it looks like cedar, and it's going to last a lot longer, and it's not going to warp. That's a whole different conversation. Or we can talk about insulation that they won't have to replace over a period of time, or that has the added benefit of deadening sound. Or, so they do want those kinds of features, but I think the kind of phraseology associated with them can be off-putting. So we really have to talk about it in terms of what is the benefit to you? Like, how does this support, the kinds of things we talked about with its ease of use or maintenance or accessibility? What are those does it facilitate any of those things? And then when that happens, then we can have a real conversation about whether that's something of value to them or not. And, you know, with code changing and shifting, and it sometimes, you know, there are times that there was a shift in the residential code in my little community that didn't get publicized very well, and it was fine. It turned out okay, but those things shift in communities from time to time, and you don't know from one little township to the next whether they're on 2009 or 2018 and what energy code they're using. So you have to sort of set some of our own standards and talk about things in terms of, again, what is going to be the value to the client.
No, I love that. And how have you seen, I guess, now we're impacted by COVID, right? Most of us, I'm sure COVID has had an impact. I mean, get away from the sustainability, but, you know, people are maybe in their homes longer or working from home, or, you know, kids that were at school are now homeschool at home on computers. So, you know, the data usage on their internet, right? And you're trying to figure out, do I have a quiet place to work, you know, do architecture if my kids are doing homeschool? So how have you seen, I guess, that transition now, not only today, but moving forward, just with everything with COVID-19?
I think we did a survey back in April, and we did a little Google Form survey, and we sent it out kind of all over the country. We, at the firm, and I have lived all over the place, and the folks at my firm have lived kind of all over the place, and so we sent it all over the place to a big range of ages, and to sort of get a sense of what they were thinking about while they were all stuck at home, and how are their houses been serving them. And we got some really interesting feedback. I had really expected a lot of people to say they needed more space. We had sent a lot of those surveys to people who were living in apartments and cities, and people saying, oh, we've got to have more space. And that really wasn't the case. Most of the time, it was about flexibility of space, was being able to change the use of a space quickly, whether that was through built-ins where they could store printers or scanners or whatever it is they needed, monitors, and turn the dining room into an office and then back into a dining room at night, or a place to put the gym equipment. It was a lot about flexibility. That was really the biggest, the most numbers of people responded to our questions about flexibility, was they were really looking for spaces that were easily transitioned from one to the other. I think the other interesting takeaway from the survey was that outdoor space and access to the outside during this particular period was especially important. And whether that was a screen porch or a deck or something that was immediately adjacent to the house, or whether it was, we live in a neighborhood where we have lots of trails that are accessible to us, places we can go walk, sort of the availability of outdoor space, whether it was private or sort of semi-public, was something else that really came up high on people's sort of wish list when we were talking about this. You know, beyond that, people gave us great stories about, you know, they had to be in different rooms and they had been putting up blankets on the walls or operating in a closet so that they could have Zoom calls. And you know, that I'm sure is happening and will continue to happen. It will, you know, we talk a lot now when we're talking to our clients just over the last few months about just adding some insulation in interior walls so that you have some sound deadening capacity, and using solid core doors and things that will separate spaces. We had some feedback on public and private spaces and whether people thought that there was a balance with that. You know, were you working in a place where the kids were constantly running through, or did you have a private space where you could go? So we got a lot of really great feedback, and to that end, what we are talking about with our clients is that feedback and saying, okay, here's what we're hearing from a lot of people right now, is that flexible spaces are really important. How can we help you create space in this new addition that's going to provide you that flexibility? Because we might be working from home forever, or, you know, to a certain extent, or your kids may be home a lot more than they thought they were going to be home, or you thought they were going to be home. So how can we help facilitate some of that in an easy way that doesn't, we're not building a whole new soundproof office for you, but how can we create a space that has that kind of flexibility?
Oh, I love that you shared that, because what's interesting, as you were speaking about that, I was thinking, okay, now what's the marketing element to this? You know, it's funny because a lot of us are finding solutions for our clients. Maybe, as you mentioned, they're not so much looking for added space, but maybe they're looking at more convenience or separation, right? Where they can have
Right.
a conference call on Zoom or a podcast such as this and not have, kids coming in and out or running behind you on the camera, right? So that's really important. But then as a company, you start thinking, okay, in our market, there is opportunity for someone that's remodeling. How can I market that? How can I showcase what we're doing? And I guess an example for us, we have a client in Paradise here locally in Paradise Valley, and they looked at it this way: hey, the gyms are closed, the dry sauna's closed, the cold plunge is closed. I need an office. I'm finance. I'm at home, and so we didn't really change the footprint of the house, but what we did, we catered it to what are things that were important to them. Right? We redid the backyard because that indoor outdoor living. So now the kids can go outside, they can swim. They can be outside and run. So it's, instead of just being like a desert landscape, let's have it more green. Let's have it lush, a little place for the kids to go stretch their legs. And then we have our cold plunge, we have our sauna. So if it's closed, now we can do this at home. And so we've turned that into marketing. Okay, well, and it's funny as other clients see that and they're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, that's a great idea. If the gym's closed, it's at my house. Well, now I can stay healthy. And so it's funny how you can take, all companies have to evolve. I mean, that's what's going to separate you. And that's what you've done, Taylor. You said, okay, well, here's a tragedy that's happened on a national level. Like, how can we better the lives of our clients, and how can we market that?
Mhm. It's been an interesting, I think just the last 6 months have really been eye-opening for me. And I know as we work, just, navigating just the day-to-day, how are we going to do this? How are we going to build this now? But thinking about the different kinds of conversations we can have with our clients that will give them some value for what they're about to invest in. And the reality of the situation is that conversation may have changed from what it would have been a year ago. It may not be that they're building a big house where they can have 50 people over all the time. They may be more focused on making sure that they have that their laundry room works really well. I've gotten a lot of that.
Is that
We're
funny?
doing a lot of laundry. Let's make sure our laundry room works really well.
we seem to be putting in. Yeah, I was gonna say we seem to be putting in 2 washers, dryers in the laundry and then one in the master, right? I mean, you just see that.
Mhm.
So it's interesting because to your point, I mean, it's, you're understanding the market conditions and you're evolving as a company, right? You're pivoting, so getting back to, I mean, you really made some good points because getting back to the ADA conversation, which I think is really important. I mean, we live in Phoenix and I do have a lot of clients that are, from the Midwest or second homeowners, and they're at a point in their life where they're purchasing a second home and they're retired or getting close to retirement. So it's a vacation home. They're here in the winter. They go, it's because it's really nice in Phoenix in the winter. They go back to the Midwest in the summer when it's really nice there. So you start thinking about how can we beautify the home, but still keep it accessible. So I guess getting back to that, given the tendency of senior living spaces to seem institutional, how can we design spaces that don't scream that you're in a facility, right? That you're in this aging house, and I guess to that point too, I mean, this is a double question for you is, what is a certified aging in place specialist?
Well, I think I'll answer the second question first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
An aging in place specialist, certified aging in place specialist, this is a lot of initials. National Association of Home Builders put together a program with AARP. There were a couple of other groups involved, but essentially it's a certification that's provided. It's actually really interesting. It's provided to folks beyond sort of the immediate sort of construction industry. So I spent 3 days in a training session at a rehab facility in Chattanooga with I say he's a young man. He's not a young man. He acts like a young man. He spoke constantly for 3 days. He's amazing, a wealth of knowledge, Steve Hoffaker, who did the training. But the interesting thing about the training was that it involved, there were a couple of contractors there. I was the only architect. There was an interior designer, but there were also occupational therapists and physical therapists, medical equipment suppliers. So it really sort of involved kind of a broad range of people. And so the aging in place specialist designation and training focuses on kind of that team aspect of it. So when we're approaching a renovation, I have conversations not just with the interior designer and the contractor, but with the owner's permission, I may also be talking to their physical therapist or their occupational therapist or somebody who understands if they are in a kind of urgent situation, or not even urgent, but immediate sort of concern situation, whether it's a kind of maybe a degenerative disease, it might be MS or Parkinson's, kind of what their trajectory is, and then what personally they may be dealing with. And so we really try and tailor our renovation solutions to the needs of that individual. So it's less of a sort of blanket set of prescriptions like ADA is. Aging in place specialists really kind of have the opportunity to look at a broader perspective and then go and tailor their design solutions to that individual. And it really does take a team. So that's kind of what aging in place specialists do. And the certification requires continuing education, but I enjoyed it because, like I said, it helped me kind of understand that there are other folks that are involved that can inform that and make that design that much better for that person. And everybody may experience their own sort of aging trajectory a little bit differently. And how can we be very specific to that client and serve them well? All that said, that's kind of the first way that we don't make aging in place scream institutional, is that if you know that your client needs X, you can tailor a design solution for that particular problem, so that you're not sort of covering everything with white plastic grab bars because you're worried that because that's the rule or that's the law. You're sort of saying, okay, really, we're worried about slips and falls in this particular area, so we're going to focus this. We have had clients with Parkinson's. We have also had clients who are shorter in stature, and so the ADA shower handle heights were too tall for her. So we wanted to sit down in the shower with her and her occupational therapist and make sure we had the hand shower held at exactly the right place. That doesn't look like an institution. That looks like something that fits her. So that's kind of the first way I think that it keeps it from screaming senior living.
And
I think the other thing that's happening.
Well, and is that a certification? You mentioned it's through the NHB, the National Association of Home Builders. Is that who gives you the certification? And then the continuing education? So you actually are like have credentials to do that.
Yeah. Okay. And some of that is sort of basic in architecture training, but I learned a lot from talking to the medical supply people about, how difficult it is to install one kind of stair lift versus a different kind of chair lift, and what kind of the weatherization protocols were, and thinking about elevators a little bit differently. So they were all, having that kind of information in a very sort of focused 3-day session really helped me kind of see things a little bit more broadly than I think I would have as just an architect approaching a client looking to redo a bathroom or to rework a closet or to add an elevator or whatever that might be. I think the other thing that helps, getting back to the senior living part of it, the other thing that helps is the manufacturers have finally gotten on board and are starting, I think, to understand that there is a market for high design. I think that I said it, and I'm sure I got it from somewhere. I'm not going to say it was original. There's no best buy date on good design. We don't age out of things looking nice. And my older clients can have much more sophisticated tastes than some of my younger clients. And so to sort of throw bland, accessible design at them is kind of insulting. And I don't want to do that. So luckily, I think, like I said, some of the major manufacturers of residential products have kind of caught up with that. So, Kohler and Moen and Brizo are all designing grab bars that match their plumbing suite. I also think smart home technology allows us to implement a lot of really great sort of safety strategies, but it being totally invisible. So we can put sensors on for night lights so that you don't have to have, stair lights around the corner. You can run an LED strip. So I think technology and smart home technology affords us the capacity to kind of make really beautiful senior living spaces that don't look like traditional senior living spaces.
Well, I love that because when I was at the National Builder Show this past January, KBIS, to your point, there were a lot of companies that had a lot of um, ADA or accessible product designs that were, really spoke to the masses, right? They were nice, they were beautiful, and they're still functional, which is really important. And I think this is like a really important topic because when you think about, if I look at it from, if I'm doing an energy efficient home, right, I'm gonna make sure I have an energy consultant, right? That's going to come in and the right architect and the right designer that understands energy efficiency and loss and, and how we can keep that energy up in the house. And so there's a lot of strategy in that design and those selections. And you think about it very similar to what you're doing is you're going to get, the physical therapist and you're going to get the medical professionals and the client. And so in essence, you're doing the same thing, just with the more advanced team that's now catered to the client and understanding what they absolutely need and how to design that and then incorporate the beauty behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me ask you this: when you're doing that, though, over the years, as you become a specialist in that, Taylor, do you feel that that aging in place design, does that increase the value of the home? Does that decrease? Is it pretty consistent with staying the same?
So I read it. It's sitting on my desk right now. There was a study put out by the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard University. And one of the topics that it covered, and I don't have the numbers exactly, was the numbers of individuals over the age of 65 projected within the next 5 years. And I think that by 2035, 49.6 million older households, and the home ownership rate for those folks over 65 is 81%.
Wow.
And that number is going to continue to grow. So we're talking about a tremendous cohort of the population. I mean, I think right now we're at 20% of the population is over 65%. Is over 65 years old. And that AARP has done studies that said that 90% of those people want to stay in their homes. So I think that by creating housing stock or renovating existing housing in great neighborhoods where people already live, where they're around their families or their drugstore or their parks or the restaurants that they enjoy going to, when we sort of make those renovations available to them, we're also making it available to the next folks that want to buy that house. And so I think it absolutely increases the value of the home. I think it increases the value of the home, not just for future homeowners who might be considering aging in place or making that their next forever home, but also certainly folks with, who have family members who have disabilities, or who may have injuries. So creating ease of use never diminishes the value of a home. It can only increase it. Just by sheer numbers alone, that demand is there, and isn't going to do anything but increase. So I absolutely think that it increases the value of a home.
I think that's great perspective. I mean, you think about all the variables out there, right? When you're looking in a neighborhood that's, good proximity to downtown or to the airport or, safe neighborhoods or good schools, the parks, the amenities that are nearby, there's value already in that real estate. We understand real estate markets in every city, right? But then you think about like a lot of young people now aren't buying homes, at least the younger demographic. They're renting, they're in, more condensed areas. But as they get older, right, that's when you want to settle down, get a home. And then now with people living longer, being healthier, like, so that age is going to continue after that plus 65. I mean, we're going to see this in 15 years where people living longer now at a point where they want to buy a home financially, because it's hard as, a young college kid coming out to buy a home. So all the demographics are pushing that way. So yeah, if you have a great design that's for aging in place and ease of use, I can see the value to, all the clientele that's going to soon be hitting that demo in every big city.
And you don't have to put everything in right now. If we build so that there's blocking in the walls in the shower, and that we build in the curb,
it's there for future.
You don't have to put all that stuff in right now. You're building it in for the future so that you don't have to rip everything out should you need it. My dad, he'd probably get mad at me for telling this, but he had his knees replaced, and we had to call and get a grab bar to get in. It was an 8-inch curb on the shower, and he couldn't get in it. And he was furious that we were going to have to put a grab bar in, and wanted to put a suction cup grab bar in, and a suction cup was not going to hold him when he was trying to get over that 8-inch curb. So thinking about, had we had that available to him, it would have been a much easier process than it was to drive through the lath and the metal lath and, tile set in essentially concrete to be able to get a grab bar into a shower with an 8-inch curb. That ease and that capacity to be adaptable down the long run, that's just as valuable as anything else. So I think if we're building with that future in mind, because it's pretty inevitable, there is going to be a consistent growth in that population. Like you said, there's going to be demand. They want to own their own homes. They want to stay next to their grandkids. They want to be in places that are familiar to them. And that's good for them. If they can stay there and do that safely, that's all positive. So we should make sure that that's available to them in terms of the housing and the renovations that we build.
So do you have any other pet peeves in architecture? I guess I say that, you kind of alluded to that already. You spoke about when the architect hasn't had enough foresight to think about potential grab bars or 8-inch curb and someone aging in place. And, some of these inconveniences, right, that they're not thinking through. Are there other things that, as an architect, I'm sure every time you go into a hotel or you travel, like there's going to be things you see because you do it. So there's just things that stick out.
We can't, things like tile not aligning, grout lines not those are the kind of things that set me off. Not putting the lights in the right place and I tend to
lighting
notice
makes
that
a big difference. It makes a huge
lighting is a big difference. And just the color temperature, that may be actually one of my biggest pet peeves. And I don't know if that's an architect's problem or a homeowner problem, but
or they have all different
lighting,
LED bulbs with different shades
different, and you got a 3500K and a 2700K, and they're in the same room, and you can't get, anyway. So I think there's lots of little sort of twitchy kinds of things that kind of bug me. But I do love the profession, and I really feel, I think my biggest pet peeve, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with architecture, is I think we've sort of put it out there, is this perception that we as architects don't design for everybody, and we really do. And most of us are just, I'm a mom of 3 kids. I had a minivan. I'm not any different. It was black, but it was still a minivan. And so we're living those lives too, and we're sort of working through some of those same life issues too. And so that's what makes us able to do a closet and work through it with you. We shouldn't be solely reserved for big projects or what you think an architect should be for. We really are capable of being helpful and providing value for all sorts of different kinds of projects. And part of that's our fault. We don't tell that story often enough. And so I think that's an internal issue.
Well, I love that because, the reality is, Taylor, you've done such a great job, a ton of experience, commercial, residential, historic, new build. And so you have just a lot of value to bring the customer. And that's the key term, right? The more value you bring, the better it's going to be. And the fact that you're a mom, you have 3 kids, you have your architecture firm is centered on families and design, right? That speaks to, to people. And I'm sure that's what attracts your clientele to your firm. So Taylor, what's upcoming and exciting for you?
Well, we just launched this Thrive at Home consultation service. So one of the things we were noticing is that a lot of folks had questions about whether or not they should stay in their house or they should sell it. And those are conversations, I should really have a counseling degree on the side. Those are conversations
I think we all should in our profession.
Can get a little fraught. And so, but they're easier, like I said, if you've got numbers or recommendations to kind of have a conversation around. So rather than investing in a sort of big set of drawings, we really are targeting a consulting service that's a kind of, we come in, we're able to kind of give recommendations based on what we find in the existing conditions of the house, have good conversations about what you love and what you want to change and where you see yourself in 20 years, and provide a very sort of customized report with some recommendations in it that allows people to really start that conversation. And I think that's an opportunity for us to provide value to more folks who aren't maybe ready to start a renovation process, but don't really know where else to start. And it gives them the value of kind of talking to a professional who's been doing it for a long time and getting that advice without the commitment of a major project. And so it's called Thrive at Home. We're really excited about it. It's a new service that we're offering, and we're finding that it's got. I think it's a lot of fun for us too.
Oh, I can
Because what
imagine.
we really do is like talking to people. So
Yeah, and it brings so much value to what you're doing already. And where can our listeners find you, Taylor?
tpdarchitect.com is our website, and I'm on Instagram at tpdarchitect. And that sort of feeds into Facebook and LinkedIn too. So we're kind of all over social media, but our website is tpdarchitect.com.
I love it. You're doing it right to be on all those platforms. It's so important.
I have an 18-year-old who's been telling me where I need to be.
It's always good to have one of those around the house. Trust me.
Oh yeah, it's great. Consultant, social media consultant.
Yes. Well, thanks so much, Taylor. You've been amazing. Thanks so much for sharing everything you did.
Appreciate it. Thank you. This was fun.